Russia's new hypersonic missile. Vladimir Putin watches the test firing of the Kremlin's latest weapon. Flying at 27 times faster than the speed of sound means it could reach the United States or anywhere else within minutes. How big a threat is it? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Vladimir Putin is describing it as an excellent New Year's gift to the nation. Russia's president is hailing the successful testing of a new missile as guaranteeing security for decades to come. Supersonic missile systems are slower than hypersonic ones. Flying at many times the speed of sound, they're designed to evade missile shield systems to strike anywhere in the world. Putin says nothing can shoot it down.
Новая система Avangard.
The new Avangard system is invincible against any existing and future enemy missile defences. It's a great success, a great victory. It will be deployed next year and will be joined by a regiment which will be put on duty. We will move forward in accordance with our plans, promising military arms systems to equip the Army and Navy.
So what do we know about the Avangard missile? The Kremlin says it flies at 30,000 kilometers an hour. That hypersonic speed is designed to make it extremely difficult to intercept or predict its flight path. Current missile defense systems can't stop hypersonic attacks. While Russia says it's the first country to go hypersonic, U.S. and Chinese experts are racing to perfect their technology. The development of hypersonic weapons is increasing concerns about a new arms race, and there's a threat to a Cold War treaty which limits existing weapons. Donald Trump accuses Russia of repeatedly violating the INF treaty and is threatening to pull out. Putin has warned if that happens, Russia will develop new missile systems.
Russia has violated the agreement. They've been violating it for many years, and I don't know why President Obama didn't negotiate or pull out. And we're not going to let them violate a nuclear agreement and go out and do weapons, and we're not allowed to. We're the ones that have stayed in the agreement, and we've honored the agreement, but Russia has not, unfortunately, honored the agreement. So we're going to terminate the agreement. We're going to pull out.
All right, let's bring in our guests. In Vienna, Tarif Rauf is former head of the Verification and Security Policy Coordination Office at the International Atomic Energy Agency. In Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer is defense analyst and columnist with the newspaper Novaya Gazeta. And in Washington, D.C., Richard Weitz is director of Center for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. Welcome to the program. Tarif, let me start with you. There has been no independent confirmation of this test, right? The Avangard missile system, is it really close to being operational?
Well, there is some doubt in Western circles. I believe the United States is still doubtful about its initial operational capability, which was announced to be in 2019. People also doubt whether the missile or the device can reach Mach 20 in terms of speed. But nonetheless, as you mentioned in your introduction, the United States, China, and Russia, as well as India, are all working towards developing these advanced hypersonic glide vehicles.
Richard, just how much of a threat do hypersonic weapon systems represent?
I would break that question down into the level of strategic operations, that is, the kind of nuclear strikes that the U.S., Russia, and China might launch against each other, and tactical, operational, battlefield level issues. So at the strategic level, they have certain advantages, as discussed in the introduction to the program. They can, because of their unpredictable flight path, they can evade certain kinds of defenses that were designed to intercept ballistic missiles that follow ballistic trajectory. However, they don't fundamentally change the fact that Russia, China, and the U.S. have enough nuclear offensive strategic forces to overcome any possible defense that could be built in the next few decades. and therefore are going to remain mutually vulnerable and therefore will have mutual deterrence. So it doesn't change that. It adds a little complexity. But the more interesting question is how they might impact at that tactical operational level. And there, the thinking is they could have as much impact as stealth did. So if Russia is able to sink a U.S. aircraft carrier by launching a hypersonic torpedo at it and then destroy, and that would reach the target in a minute from a submarine that the U.S. wouldn't be able to identify where its location is in advance, that could have a major change in how we might see battles occur off Syria, for example.
Pavel, does this announcement by President Putin mean to a large extent we have actually seen the onset of a new arms race?
Well, it seems that, yes, Russia and America are edging to a new arms race. That was obvious for some time. Russia has been modernizing very much its nuclear capabilities, and now this year, almost a year ago, but this year, the United States introduced the new nuclear posture review, which also means that they'll be developing new weapons, a development that didn't happen under Barack Obama, who didn't want to develop new weapons, who wanted to be he was anti-nuclear to the core. But this kind of specific missile, well, it's not really a missile. I mean, the missile that was reportedly fired is an old Soviet SS-19, developed and built in the 80s. And this is a new warhead, actually, which can be attached to basically any ballistic missile or space launcher. And then when it re-enters the atmosphere, it can fly on some kind of trajectory that's unpredictable and then nonetheless reach its target afterwards. But basically, ballistic warheads, especially intercontinental ballistic warheads, always traveled at hyperspeed. That's nothing new. But before they made the kind of beeline to the target, and the more accurate the better, this is a maneuverable gliding warhead, which is technically a very big achievement, though it doesn't alter the basic nuclear balance of deterrence. That's true.
Richard, I saw you nodding your head to some of what Pavel was saying. Did you want to add something?
No, to make clear, it's the hypersonic technologies that we're looking at isn't necessarily referring to the delivery vehicle, that is the missile. It's more the re-entry system. So if it's a gliding warhead, a hypersonic gliding vehicle, it's not in a typical re-entry vehicle, which it normally goes in a ballistic trajectory. And that means it's going to, it can rely, because it's flying very low, and at the level of the atmosphere, at the low level of the atmosphere, it's able to maneuver using the air and so on. That said, if you know what the target is, it is possible to intercept it. So if you know that they're trying to hit the Pentagon, then in theory, even if you don't know how it's going to get there, you know where it's going to end up. And so that does allow, in theory, the possibility of defense.
Tarek, apart from the, whether or not this is actually close to being operational, the fact of the matter is, this announcement coming when it does really underscores, doesn't it, how much nuclear saber rattling has become, really quite central to President Putin when it comes to trying to showcase Russia as a superpower at home and abroad, correct?
Yes, I think it's correct. It's also, in my view, reflects some frustration on the part of President Putin, who has proposed to the United States to discuss in the format of the Standing Verification Commission under the INF Treaty issues of mutual noncompliance. He's also offered to the U.S. to extend the Strategic Arms Control Treaty by another 5 years to 2026. But from the U.S., in his view, he has not received a satisfactory answer. And given the vituperative opposition to President Trump by the mainstream media, by the Democrats, President Putin sees that in the Trump administration, he is not going to get a negotiating partner on arms control, and this is his way of pushing back. But I would also argue that there is an asymmetry The U.S. was looking at hypersonic vehicles through its conventional precision attack strategy to be able to deliver a warhead at any place on the planet within 1 hour using a conventional warhead to attack targets like the hideout of Osama bin Laden before he was killed, or ISIS or Al-Qaeda targets. The U.S. and China, in response, are targeting, apparently, U.S. strategic forces to defeat the U.S. Trilateral missile defense system and also the ground-based missile defense system that the U.S. is putting in place. So I'm also concerned about this asymmetry and possibly mixing conventional warheads and nuclear warheads on the delivery system of these advanced hypersonic glide vehicles.
Pavel, let's talk for a minute about the U.S., because U.S. officials have in recent months warned that their efforts at the development of hypersonic weapon systems, that they lag behind those of other countries such as Russia. Do you believe that?
Well, again, that's how you define a hypersonic weapon or vehicle. I mean, if it's a warhead a modified, seriously modified reentry vehicle attached to a ballistic missile, medium range or an intercontinental, that's one thing, and that's rather easier to make, though of course there are very serious problems there too for the electronic components not to burn out because of the high temperature that it achieves while going through the dense atmosphere. But if you're talking about a kind of plane or some kind of flying vehicle that will have an engine and will fly at hypersonic speed in the upper atmosphere, that's a much more difficult achievement, and that's what the United States is basically working on. Because, you know, the shuttle was also returning from space. It flew at hyperspeed, and it was maneuvered to land. And the United States has an unmanned shuttles, these X-37 that go into space and go back, also maneuver at hyperspeed and then land where they are intended to. So that's achievable. What's really the problem is making an engine that would work at hyperspeed and a plane, some kind of flying object that could go on its own engine, not just simply using the energy of it going down to Earth from space. And that's what really the United States is working on. Russia is working on that too, and China, that goal has not been really yet achieved by anyone.
Richard, if we could just take a step back for a second, just how bad is the relationship right now between the U.S. and Russia?
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, I'm disappointed. I was a child of the Cold War. I studied the Soviet Union in order to try and, destroy it. But then the Cold War ended, and now we were looking to partnership with Russia. But it's been one disappointment after another. So we had a slight reconciliation in the Cold War that collapsed. Then after 9/11, the 2001 terrorist attacks, there was a brief reconciliation, but that slowly faded over time. President Obama came in, made a sincere effort to reset relations with Russia, but that failed. And now President Trump, that was one thing he made, was one of his core objectives, was improve relations with Russia, and he's failed. So I don't know what's going to make the relationship better. It's just awful. And so, as both speakers have pointed out, this leads to a very unfortunate situation regarding arms control and among other relations. So, as was discussed, we now have one treaty that's about to collapse, the INF Treaty, which was signed during the Cold War and limits the range of systems within the 5,500 kilometer to 500 kilometer. And we've got a second one whose fate is uncertain, the more important New START Treaty, which is going to expire in 2021, but can be either extended by both presidents without needing legislative approval for 5 years, as allowed by the protocol, perhaps changed and expanded so you can maybe try and deal with these hypersonic systems, or they could just collapse and have no arms control, and that's the relationship the U.S. has now with China. And Richard, no formal limits on their strategic systems.
Richard, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to be clear also, as far as the INF Treaty, I mean, hypersonic missiles, hypersonic systems are not covered at all in that INF Treaty, correct?
Correct. So what is covered by the treaties, INF and the New START, are the missiles and the nuclear warheads. And so if Russia wants to have 1,000 missiles, which is under the treaty for the New START treaty, Russia is free. Well, I guess it's about 800 missiles, strategic missiles, land-based. And if you want to put normal reentry vehicles, or you want to put hypersonic reentry vehicles, I mean, that's really up to the national decision-making, as long as you comply with the other exchanges and verification and so on. So they do not need to violate a treaty. But if you want to break out from the treaty, they would be one means by which you do so. But it's really the treaties are trying to limit the number of launchers and nuclear warheads, not so much how you have them reach the target.
Tarif, China has also said that it has successfully tested hypersonic aircraft. Do we know where things stand in China with regard to any kind of development of hypersonic missile systems, weaponry of any kind?
Well, China has conducted nearly 10 tests of its version of a hypersonic glide vehicle. Apparently, they've achieved a velocity of about Mach 10 as opposed to Mach 20 by the US and the Russian Federation. But some believe that China may be the first to actually deploy, regardless of President Putin's announcement yesterday. I'm also concerned about possible new entrants. Pakistan, in response to India, Japan, and South Korea, apparently are also considering the possibility of developing this. In the US, there is a lot of concern about technology theft, so to speak, by China, but I'm also concerned about technology theft by India, because a lot of IT specialists from India are working in the U.S., especially on defense contracts. This is something that is underreported at the moment. The Indians apparently are developing something called the Shaurya, which is supposed to be another hypersonic glide vehicle variant, and also the BrahMos 2. BrahMos is a supersonic cruise missile jointly being developed by India and Russia. So we may also be on the verge of a new multilateral or multi-party arms race in these hypersonic vehicles. With regard to arms control, hypersonics fall in the gaps. They are not a ballistic missile, but they are launched by a ballistic missile. Whether a hypersonic glide vehicle can be characterized as a warhead is still open to question. So this is yet another important issue to be concerned about, whether this falls through the gap and is not captured by the arms control discourse. And now, for the first time in the 60-year history of arms control between Washington and Moscow, there is no dialogue. Even during the worst years of the Cold War, the US and Russia were negotiating on strategic arms control. And so we are now on the verge of entering into a very dangerous phase, both with regard to conventional weapons proliferation, but also unrestrained strategic arms race.
Pavel, if I could ask you to expand on a point that Tarif was making there. I mean, there are concerns about these weapons systems and delivery systems becoming operational, but then there are also concerns about proliferation. In your mind, from your vantage point, what is more worrying?
Well, both are worrying, but you also should take it all with a pinch of salt, because, I mean, there's a lot of hype internationally about hypersonic. And when you say hypersonic, everyone believes that that's something real bad, terrible. But actually, in operational sense, traditional warheads are also very good and actually cheaper, more reliable, and more accurate than hypersonic things. So Russia, yes, Putin announced there will be deployment in 2019, but they'll deploy only 2, apparently, such missiles with a modified reentry vehicle, a glider. Because the problem is it doesn't add anything. It actually even detracts, because on a SS-19, say, you can put up to 6 regular warheads, but apparently only 1 glider, which will carry most likely the same nuclear warhead or the same nuclear device. So that means hypersonic doesn't always mean that it's better, at least for the time being. But yes, the race is expanding. arms control, as we knew it before, is collapsing because the arms control treaties that are now still in existence were signed as the Cold War was ending or ended, and they reflected the reality that's no more there, because right now there's a kind of new Cold War between Russia and the West. And that means those treaties already are not relevant, and no new treaties are not apparently appearing. There are indeed no negotiations happening between Moscow and Washington of any real substance on arms control, and that is very, very worrying.
Richard, could you envision some type of trilateral treaty with regard to hypersonic weapons being signed or being developed at any point soon between the U.S., Russia, and China in the environment in which we're living now?
I think it's possible because you do have examples of cooperation among these three countries, even despite the strong tensions between them. So they have cooperated to some extent to keep Iran from developing nuclear weapons or long-range ICBMs. They've also cooperated in the case of North Korea. And probably most relevant is the three cooperated to keep the nuclear ban treaty from being adopted. So they can cooperate when it's in their interest. And so they may, I think it's still a stretch to think that they would limit their own hypersonic systems. But I could see them working, as you asked Pavel, to try and cooperate to prevent other countries from getting this technology. So, the kind of situation you want to avoid is less concerned about how these systems might affect the balance between these three countries, given their robust strategic arsenals. But say, thinking, what would happen if Iran had a hypersonic delivery system that it could destroy Israel in a couple minutes? I mean, that just creates a strong incentive on the part of the Israelis to strike first. And the same is true, as was mentioned, with respect to India and Pakistan. They're so close together that if you can get a warhead that can just launch and hit the target in a couple of seconds, that's just a terrible strategic environment. There's a strong incentive to strike first, and so on. And so that's why they would have both a general interest in limiting the proliferation of technologies and a specific concern about regional conflicts going out of control. So I think it is possible for such cooperation to occur. And President Trump actually called for that. At the G20 meeting in Argentina, he said, we need to launch some more cooperation with Russia and China on arms control.
Tarek, we only have about 2 minutes left. Just let me ask you this.
Yes,
obviously, we don't yet know how much all of this is hype, but in this environment where things seem to be escalated, how destabilizing does all this have the potential to be?
Well, I think in the short term, it has the potential to be gravely stabilizing. If we have an incident in the South China Sea between the Chinese Navy and the U.S. Navy, we don't know whether that will escalate out of hand. If there's an incident in Ukraine or in Syria, where you have American and Russian forces still present, miscalculation, that's the big fear at the moment, is an accidental clash that nobody wants, but it escalates out of control. Hypersonics will not play a role in that. My other point is that if the START agreement collapses, its verification system also collapses. And despite the bad relationship between Washington and the United States, and Russia, the START agreement still is active in terms of verification. Both sides are verifying each other, and neither side has accused the other side of violating the START agreement.
All right, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all our guests, Tarif Rauf, Pavel Felgenhauer, and Richard Weitz. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.